And what a great thing it is to trust in Jesus. I want to invite our next speaker to come forward. You can be seated. This is the Reverend Russ Pierce. He is the Executive Director of Mission Engagement at Global Ministries. What he does deals with marketing, fundraising, communications, and the Center for Mission Innovation, and also the Advance, which we're familiar with as good Methodists. He is also on the staff as part of UMCOR after serving for 3 years with Church World Service. He's from North Carolina, and he is an ordained elder in the Western North Carolina Conference. He has pastored congregations, I love this, ranging in size from 8 to 2,200, which is we have congregations here representing all of those. He was seminary, Duke Divinity School, and also has a Master of Nonprofit Administration. He and his wife, Kathy, are members of the Western North Carolina Conference, and they have two lovely children, Claire and Aiden. Welcome, Reverend Pierce.
Good morning. I'm impressed that Amy is so bold as to have her children sit in. Last year, when I made the transition to Church World Service, we were home at Western North Carolina Conference, and the day that I needed to get up, or day before I was to give my presentation, my children said to me, they were then 8 and 11, they said, Daddy, we've been thinking about your presentation today, and you know, you like office work. You're not like Mommy. Mommy's in a church. Mommy preaches every week. Mommy's very good. And so we think that maybe, you know how you have us practice, or you're willing to let us practice, you should practice for us. And so there I stood in the Comfort Inn in Maggie Valley, North Carolina, practicing, only to have my children inform me my poise was not good, my pace was not good, and I wasn't looking up enough from holding my laptop in front of me while going through it. So they are here on the island, but nowhere near this room. Because we are just not doing that today. So they did ask me if I wanted to practice, and I'm like, oh, you guys are you just vacation. I'm good. Daddy's good. So I want us to talk for just a moment about this phrase that we love to use, the world is my parish. Now, have you ever in your church, had that moment where you had a mission team going overseas, or you were trying to raise money for work overseas, and you gave the good old John Wesley said, the world is my parish. And anybody ever maybe worked that in as a justification? So there's some bad news about this phrase if you don't know it. He was not in any way talking about anything global. Nothing global whatsoever. Now, probably I'm in trouble when I get back to work, because I probably should be promoting the world is my parish all the time, particularly with the role I carry at Global Ministries. But the interesting thing is that this phrase comes from 1739. 1739. So very, very early in Wesley's ministry. Oh, yeah. Go ahead and if you'd put it back up. Thank you. So this quote comes from 1739. It is right at the time where he is beginning to experiment with preaching out in the fields, especially around Bristol. And England in that time, and to this day, has legal definitions of what a parish is throughout the islands. It is completely and utterly defined, which I think is a fascinating thing to think about, because every parish priest knows exactly what their parish boundaries are and the area that they are quite literally responsible for above and beyond the particular church that they have and the congregation that they're caring for. But at that point, what Wesley was talking about and trying to deal with in this statement, the world is my parish, was not, I want to go global. It was that I have the ability to preach and go beyond the normal bounds of this particular parish and community. Because he was getting in a lot of trouble for preaching in places that there was a parish priest there, and he shouldn't have been there, technically, if he wasn't invited. But the two things that have really set in my mind a lot with this is just this idea of having a set place. Not just the church and the people in it, but having an actual geographic location for which you're responsible for. But also being willing to go beyond the normal boundaries to engage, beyond the boundaries of the congregation that's there, the particular people that are there. So I want us to think today, if we can show this slide, about the community is my parish. So I have pulled up on a Google map, this is my home. So I live in Gwinnett County. So I'm embarrassed to say that I have just, in the last 2 days, met Rodrigo. And here is my house, and 3.7 miles from my house is the Net. And 3.7 miles from my house is Cannon Church. So we ended up at Cannon Church for two simple reasons. One, that a college friend invited us. But the other interesting piece, and I don't know about you, but I'm a fairly heavy-set person. I don't ever wear any clothing that explains how I got this way. So I don't wear Ben & Jerry's shirts. I don't wear Reese's Peanut Butter Cup shirts. I've been given those things free, and I pass them on. I just don't wear the explanation. But an interesting thing happened on this map, and this is a very telling piece, how I got this way, but also how we ended up at Cannon. So do you see there's another little box up here? Yep, that says Culver's. So if you have never lived in the Midwest, and we moved from South Bend, Indiana, down to Atlanta for Global Ministries work, Culver's is this amazing restaurant with fresh custard, and I could do a commercial right now, out of Wisconsin. And so 6 months before we moved, someone opened a Culver's within 10 minutes of our house. And when we started out searching for churches, as I said, one of my college friends had invited us to Cannon. We went to Cannon, and on the first Sunday between services, and I'd asked Jesus to make this easy for me. The guy from Culver's was coming to Cannon Church, and they had Culver's ice cream. And he was there in his blue apron and his cute little blue Culver's hat, and asked what I wanted. And I thought, Jesus, you speak to me in ways I understand. So we have been there at Cannon Church because of Culver's, truth be told. But what's so very interesting, if you don't know a lot about Gwinnett County, it is one of the most diverse counties within this entire Southeast, to be quite frank. And if you start out from my house and go either direction from it, you see this extraordinarily mixed community, for lack of a better way to put it. I often joke that 30 years ago, the neighborhood that I live in was sort of Whitey McWhiteyville. I mean, it looked like so many white, I did some of my growing up in one of these in North Carolina, just so exceedingly homogenous communities. But now it's completely and utterly different. Our closest grocery stores are an Indian, Pakistani grocery store and a Korean grocery store, which has a huge Hispanic section within it. I find that part fascinating. But the whole area has changed dramatically. And you have to be, you can live, like I do have neighbors, to be quite honest, that still live in the neighborhood that was there 30 years ago. And I have other neighbors who we moved there because we were so excited about being in very good but extremely diverse schools. And we were excited when we went up the road and the Kroger wasn't a Kroger anymore, it was Shahi Bazaar. But to see that kind of mixing is just absolutely fascinating. But what I have found over the years is that a useful thing when we are serving in a parish is to sort of find a way to define those lines. Do it off mission insight, do it off school boundaries. Pick some boundaries that are around the place that church is planted, and then figure out how you're going to dig in and better understand it. And what I've realized over time is when we take this community as my parish approach, two questions pretty immediately come up. One is, where do I even start? Where do I even start? And tomorrow, at the end of the week, we're going to come back to that question of where do I even start? So that we'll have some sense of, okay, Monday morning when you're back home and the beach and the island are behind you and they're behind us, where do we start? But today, we want to talk a little bit about what can we really offer? What can we really offer? Because I think oftentimes that's a block and a challenge for us when we start thinking about doing ministry in different ways in our particular community or context. And just a little bit of a background about me, a little addition to what was shared earlier. You may have caught that I have a nonprofit degree in addition to the kind of usual elder clergy track sort of stuff. But for the last 15 years, I have spent a lot of my time going between sort of nonprofit world, even when I was in regular parish settings, so to speak, and church world. And one of the things I've learned is that there seems at moments to be this unnecessary chasm between the work of nonprofits in our communities and the work of our churches. Or there's this, I would call it, horrendous duplication of services at times. One of my favorite things I heard George say yesterday was that sometimes there's this sin of thinking that we have to do this on our own. And a number of you raised your hand. If you'll do this again, if you have a food pantry in your church, would you raise your hand? If there's another food pantry in a church within a mile of you, raise your hand. If you have a clothes minutes closet in your church, raise your hand. If there's another clothes closet within a mile of your church, yeah, do you see? That's one of those pieces where sometimes I feel like we think we need sort of like the Jesus edition of helping. And sometimes just helping can be a way of living out the gospel, even if it doesn't have a tract attached to it, which is something I've experienced a few places. So I want you to think for just a moment, maybe turn to someone who's near you. What are some of the ways that your congregation currently partners with its community? Take just a couple minutes, turn to someone near you. What are some of the ways that your congregation currently partners with the community? So as we come back together, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
It's amazing how that works. I'm learning to watch what George does and repeat what George does. So just for a moment, a few folks to share, just very briefly, ways that your congregation is partnering with your community. Sir. Great. Mhm. Yep. Great. Good. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Another. Yes, sir. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Okay. My church partners with the school system, and during the year, we have a lot of students in the school system that receive assistance for lunches, but what happens over the weekend? So my church packs bags of food and snacks, and then on Friday, they go and they hand all those out to the students so they can have something over the weekend. So they call that Blessed Sacks. But it's a very popular thing to do in the area that we're in, and different churches are doing similar things that provide something over the weekend. So that's a neat ministry.
Great. Thank you. One more. Yes.
My church partners with the medical community, with an organization called Cancer Navigators. They send to us, to our food pantry, cancer patients who are undergoing treatment so that they don't have to stand in line at the big food pantry across town. They can come to us. They're the only ones that we serve, and they get their food.
Okay. Great. Great.
We
So-
also pray for them.
Say that again?
We also pray for them.
Yes, very good, very good. So if you think about it, we're already hearing about partnering around educational needs, partnering around medical needs, partnering around hunger issues. And what I want us to think about is whenever we do partnering work in our communities, the resources that we can bring, because it takes people resources, it often takes our facilities, and it takes financial resources. And what I want us to do is dig down and think pretty practically. So we mentioned earlier that the Center for Mission Innovation is within the body of work that I care for at Global Ministries. And when I inherited the Center for Mission Innovation last year, one of the things we looked at, two interesting pieces were, one, we took a look at the resources Global Ministries offers, because having been a parish pastor for many years, I was very, very curious exactly what we had. And what we first found was we have about 17 items on the theology of mission, which is very important. As a Duke graduate, I'm required to say that theology is very important. It is. But then we found we only had a slight handful of things that were about practically how do we take theology and make it work in local communities, either here in the United States or around the world. That was very accessible. And so that's one of the pieces we've been working on that was behind some of the work that we did in designing this week around a balance between theory and practice. But for a few minutes, we're going to get very, very practical if you'll permit me. So I want to talk first about people resources when we're engaging in our community. And I actually want to start with you as a pastoral or ministry leader in your congregation, in your community, and in your context. Because I don't know that we often give enough thought to what we can actually offer and what we bring when we're partnering in the local community. So I want you to think first about your particular spiritual gifts. Now, my suspicion is that most of us have at some point preached a good sermon or at least a decent-ish sermon, on spiritual gifts in our church. And we talked about it with folks about the importance of the laity, not only using it in the church, those gifts in the church, but using it out in the world. Anybody done this? Now my question is, have you ever thought about the spiritual gifts that you have as a pastoral or ministry leader and then made that same application? How can those gifts be used out in the community? If you haven't looked lately, go to umc.org. They have a terrific and very wonderfully simple resource on spiritual gifts. And whoever wrote those definitions has to have been thinking both about church and community, because it's really obvious the ways that you can use your gifts in the church and out in the community. Now, I will say for me, I'm one of those like administrative leader nerd sort of people. So, like in my home conference, I get made fun of about this at Global Ministries, I have never been on the conference missions committee. They will always put me on trustees or finance or something like that. And that just happens to be my gift set. And the same thing tends to happen when I'm engaging in local communities. I will be put on a board without fail, just because there aren't a lot of us that are willing to do that and have that particular gift set. But when you run into most nonprofits, the variety of opportunities they have for serving is endless, and your spiritual gifts will fit in some particular and helpful way. I also want you to think a little bit about how much time you can give. Now, some of this has to do with family needs and particular schedules in your church or churches. I know that a lot of us think, how can I possibly add anything else? And that's a very, very, very good question. Now, it's interesting, again, if you haven't been in the discipline lately and read paragraph 340, I did this under some duress, but I read through the expectations of elders and licensed local pastors, and it is fascinating to read through this. Now, frankly, a lot of it has to do with internal things. It really, really does. But if you pay close attention, there are some really important pieces in there about our helping lead out into the community. And a lot of these are really wordy. But there's this one that's tacked on the bottom that somehow I had never noticed before. And it says, lead the congregation into racial and ethnic diversity. And I confess, I don't know when that was added. I need to go back and look in my disciplines and figure that out. But I just thought that was so interesting that that is in there and that that's in expectations along with preaching and teaching and nurture. So there's an expectation that will be out and engaged in our communities. And a number of years ago, I heard someone say, and I cannot pin down who I heard say this, so I usually ascribe all wise wisdom to Lovett Weems if I can't figure out where it came from. So I'm going to say at some point, Lovett Weems told us that if we were to look at our time, to look at a proper job description for ourselves, that we would be wise to find the way to put 20% of our time out into engaging the community beyond the walls of our church. 20% of our time. And that's probably one of those pieces that, again, it's like, how could I fit that in? But it may be worth a conversation with the staff parish or pastor parish committee to say, if we're going to dig into this community and engage with this community and learn this community, we've got to set aside the time to do it, and one mark might be doing it at 20%. So the other thing is thinking about what you are really passionate about. So, interesting piece. So, is anybody else sort of a train nerd? Yes. There aren't many of us. Most of us won't admit it. So we've joked for years that, so I will go and sit and watch Trains. That's my calm place. I get Trains magazine. As soon as it comes, I pop it open. I look at the pictures. People make fun of me. And I keep saying, the nice thing about getting this magazine and looking at it for the pictures, not the articles, is there's nothing chargeable about looking at Trains magazine. Nothing chargeable. I've yet to figure out how to put this passion for trains to use, but now that dinner church is becoming a thing, I have found out that there's a railway museum right by my house, and I'm going to figure out how to do dinner church on the train sometime. But I I'm kind of kidding, but probably people would come. But it's important to think about the pieces as you're trying to find ways to engage your community, to think about the pieces that you're passionate about. The fact that I love trains isn't going to get me very far. The fact that I have this part of me that always is deeply engaged around hunger issues is a driving piece for me. And my suspicion is that you know what those triggers are for you. If it could be around children, it could be around work with the elderly, it could be around those who've experienced domestic violence. There's some part of you that feels driven to that kind of work. And I think one of the real interesting challenges we can look at is, how do we find ways to engage that in the community with existing organizations? So some years ago, when I was living in Asheville, I happened to know the head of the Council of Governments that covers like Western Fifth of North Carolina. And so I called him and I said, Bob, I'm ready to get out and just be engaged in the community. And he started coming up with all these ideas. And it was like the local Christian crisis ministry, and it was Habitat. And I said, I don't know how to say this differently, but I need it to be a ministry. I need it to be something that's aligned with what I'm interested in, that isn't like a church thing. And he was kind of taken aback because he also happened to be the conference lay leader at the time. And he said, no, tell me more. And I said, I feel like I want to go and spend time with other people. Like, I want to get out and engage with the community in a different way. And if I go hang out at ABCCM, which is a wonderful ministry, I'm going to be hanging out with the same crew. They're just from different churches. What else have you got? And so I ended up on the board of Meals on Wheels and on the City Greenway Commission. Everybody know what a greenway is? Those little multimodal paths. Now, most people think, why in the world would a pastor want to be on a greenway commission? So part of it's transportation related. But this was the committee that decided where paths were going around town. And a few of us were able to have influence and push on ideas around making sure the connectivity wasn't just about tourists. It was about making sure that affordable housing was connected to places with jobs, because this was another way to travel. And so that passion around hunger and poverty, and passion a little bit around trains and transportation, got to be put in place. And what was interesting was, being out in that realm, people were fascinated. I mean, you're looking at me kind of like, why would a pastor do that? They were like, why is a pastor on here? What is a pastor doing on the Greenway Commission? Every time they introduced me as Reverend on this like city-appointed council, people would just stare at me. But I was able to meet a whole different group of people that never were engaged with our particular church at the outset, but that helped me learn, helped the church learn more about the other layers of community that were there that I didn't really know. So pay attention to things that you're passionate about and think creatively about how you might do that. So you also have people resources in the congregation, and I won't go too far into this because I feel like we've heard a lot of good stories around this, particularly on Monday night and about the attorney over in Brunswick. I agree with what George said yesterday. It is not necessarily a good thing for ministries and the church to be completely focused on the interests and abilities of the pastor. It's really important for these ministries in particular to be very, very lay-driven. But it's also interesting to think through your congregation. Again, same questions. What are the skills and gifts? What time can they give? And what are their passions? And all of us have some story about probably engaging in school locally that's been driven by a person within the congregation responding to their love for children, their love or their need to respond to hunger issues in the community. A lot of times our overseas partnerships in our churches are driven by an individual or a group of folks in the congregation. And so that's an important piece to continue looking at. I shared with, up on the piece here just for a moment, a partnership at Wesley Memorial in Oak Hill that follows very much the same partner. This is in High Point, North Carolina, but out of North Carolina's 100 counties, Oak Hill Elementary School was in the bottom 10 in terms of performance. across the entire state, which was quite a remarkable thing. And a member of the church who actually had a degree in public health from Carolina started learning more about not just hunger issues, but she started learning about the impact on educational outcomes of hunger issues in children. And a new principal happened to be appointed about the time that she was learning about this. And so she went and met with the new principal and just said, what could we help with? How could we engage as a church? And it was interesting because this was out of a church that was extremely connected in the community. Every board in this city had somebody from Wesley Memorial on it. She knew all the folks in town who had leadership at the United Way, in a lot of the businesses. She was an avid cyclist and was connected into that community. And she was able to bring the church, the community, and even her cycling community together around this school to support the pieces that they identified as needing additional resources to accomplish. And in like 3 years, it was one of the best performing in the county. All because she had a passion and other folks within the congregation happened to get behind it. So again, that's one that I think is probably most familiar to us, but it's still important to be listening and paying attention to folks in our congregations who can take us into those new parts of the community. I also want us to talk a bit about facility resources. So we've often heard this adage that it's about location, location, location. And I think at some point, there probably needs to be a little bit of research about the importance of location for churches now. If we are moving from attractional to missional, I mean, to me, attractional requires a very prominent site. I'm really curious if we're being more missional, if the location is quite as important as it once was. I mean, I'm not sure that it is. But I wanted to share a quick story. This is Berry Temple, a historically African-American church in Asheville, North Carolina. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience of being appointed to a church that when you saw the location, you thought, I'm not sure this could be any more hidden. What are we going to do? I don't know, has anybody ever been to Asheville and know where where the tunnel is? And then there's that big cut on the interstate. Okay, so Berry Temple is actually a historic mission church. There was a mission high school for African-American girls, boarding school across the street from it. It used to be on US Highway 25 and 70, the Dixie Highway from up north to down to Florida. And then urban revitalization came through, and a new interstate came through, and it was suddenly on a stub end called College Place instead of all those other highway designations. It was so close to the interstate that you could stand at the back door and throw things onto cars going by, even if you did not have a good throw. Not the location that you necessarily think you want. And yet, right on the edge of an extremely vibrant downtown. So an interesting thing happened as this congregation began to engage in its community. Narcotics Anonymous came to the church and said, we need a location downtown. We're having a hard time as everything's revitalizing. We need a place to go, but we need a place that's discreet to be if possible. Would you all have any interest? And suddenly, this church that had a terrible location became a very valuable asset to a group of people in the community. Because not only could they drive and park discreetly, folks could walk to the church because it was so close to downtown. And so the church opened itself up. Many of our churches have AA meetings, but many of us are in places where there are a variety of needs from the nonprofit community. They need space. And while this is a pretty extreme example, there are a lot of opportunities, regardless of where we're located. The other interesting thing happened is that this church happened to be parked, let me get the right one up here, happened to be at the bottom of Town Mountain. And big cycling community in Asheville. There's something called the Town Mountain Hill Climb Time Trials. So people who are very fit apparently like to race each other up the mountain. I have pictures of me on a bike. I am not one of the people pictured. But that's Barry Temple again. And some of the folks connected to NA also happen to be cyclists. And they came to us and said, again, you have this really great spot. Is there any way that you would partner with us, allow us to use the space? And now every year they host the time trials, and there are people who learn about the church that otherwise wouldn't. There are people who are engaged in the church that otherwise wouldn't be. The other way we use our resources, this is Wesley Memorial in High Point, North Carolina. So this is 100,000 square feet and 5 buildings, a beautiful stone. It was a 2-page spread in Life magazine when it opened. It was originally built to house a congregation of 5,000 people. It peaked in 1987 at 2,700. It's now about 2,200. Has anybody ever served a church that had more space than they need? Yes. There was a building boom apparently in the 50s and 60s in particular. So Wesley Memorial was an interesting place because, again, they had a lot of partnerships in the community. So they would often open up, because they had the facilities. A lot of times larger churches have facilities to open up for banquets and a whole variety of things that can come in. A lot of our larger churches, or even medium and small-sized churches in good locations and have good space, are welcoming nonprofits to actually move in and do ministry out of those spaces. That's nothing new, but it may just be something that you have not thought about in your particular location. But the other interesting piece about some of our churches, and this happened at Wesley Memorial. So Wesley Memorial, you know that stratification that happens in many communities in terms of, is this like in the old days, like, is this the worker church? Is this the supervisor church, the management church? So this was like the furniture company owner church originally when it was built. And it wasn't a church that ever did much in the way of advocacy. So they really weren't known in the community for really standing up for anything, honestly, in the way that we think of advocacy. But after they got involved with the schools at Oak Hill and involved in a couple more, there was this group of people who got very, very excited around advocacy issues when the state kept changing a lot of laws that were very detrimental to public schools. And a group came together and said, we'd like to host a meeting here. We've got the principals from the main schools that are willing to come. We've got somebody from the county administration that's willing to come. We want to have an open forum about what's happening because of the changes that are being made in the legislature. And again, they'd never done anything like this before. Never crossed their minds. Well, because it was education, and because they've been doing this ministry here in the community at Oak Hill, there was an openness to hosting it. And the fact that Wesley Memorial would host an event that was about advocacy and calling on different things to happen in the legislature was a game changer in the neighborhood. Just hosting certain events can become a way to partner with our local community and to become an asset and actually make a statement beyond what we would normally expect. Very quickly, another piece on facility resources. Sometimes it's time to just do something radical with your space. And we're going to hear a lot about that, I think, today with Donna. But one of the pieces that we're working on right now at Global Ministries through the Center for Mission Innovation is trying to inventory where congregations have done something very radical with their property. Because we are getting more and more questions about how to think differently about space use. And of course, Global Ministries itself is in a space that was once owned by the church that is now there in partnership and ministry with us, but it's actually now Global Ministries' facility. That's a pretty radical departure and change. But that's something that if you'll kind of keep an eye on us and follow us on Facebook and things, we are going to be looking at new ways to do that. The last piece of resource is thinking about how you invest your financial resources. My suspicion is that for most of our churches, if we are giving to something in our local community, it is probably something that has a church tie. Some kind of church tie. And there are a lot of really good things about that. But it's also interesting to think about, as your community changes and you're trying to engage in different ways, what are different investments that we can make to signal our interest in the community and the kind of community we believe God is trying to envision. So this is Granger Good Shepherd. Most of you have probably heard of Granger Community Church. This is the other United Methodist Church in Granger. Congregation of about 45 people on a Sunday. And Granger is one of these Midwestern suburbs that grew without any planning whatsoever. So you have to drive to absolutely, positively everything. And a number of years ago, church very involved in a lot of the ministries, the church-related ministries in its community, they were approached by the Friends of Granger Paths. And they were asked to become a partner. And so they were trying to put basically sidewalks and greenways into this suburb that had no connections. And they really struggled with this for a little bit because they thought, well, this isn't supporting, our usual work at the Salvation Army or Hope Ministry or a paper pantry that we run. This is very, very different. And the interesting piece is that this spot right here, which also is dead center basically, that's where the church sits. And they realized they were literally in the center of everything that was planned. A park was going to be across the street. The path was going to come right to them. They knew that people were trying to find other ways to travel, and there was attractiveness to being able to walk or bike to your church. And so they made a $1,000 investment, which was quite a lot for a small church, in order to see the Granger Paths come to fruition. And when they have their 5K event every year, they move their worship to another time so it doesn't interfere, and so they can allow their parking to be used. So they're using their finances and their facilities. So I think our challenge, again, I hope this isn't like too practical, is just to begin thinking creatively about how we partner in our local communities as an act of getting to know that community differently and as a way of also signaling to them that we find importance in the community beyond just the stuff that we normally think of. Does that make sense? Most people, when I've talked to them out in the nonprofit world, are pretty convinced that churches are very interested in churchy stuff. They've noticed that a lot of the fundraisers we do are either about supporting the church or about mission trips or something church stuff, just church stuff. And they are so excited when we will give a signal that we are interested in larger issues. They are so excited when we will give our own time, the church's time, the facility space, or just invest in what's happening in order to build a very different kind of community. So I know I'm at my time, and I've been told like 10:30 you must stop because people will start walking for food, which I understand. If it was Culver's, I would do the same thing. Do the same thing. But I want to just leave this with you as you go into break time, is just to be thinking, how can we creatively and differently use the resources in our congregations to learn and impact and partner with our communities? Thank you.